Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started just so that we stay on time. So, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for our second of our integrated pest management webinar series. We are very thankful and very fortunate to be joined today by Dr. Tom Kuhar of Virginia Tech, who is a vegetable entomologist specialist down at Virginia Tech. And I have known him for a few years, and he is always a wealth of knowledge when it comes to vegetables and vegetable insect pests. So we're very thankful that he took some time off of his busy schedule to come talk to us for the next hour or so about managing squash bugs and cucumber beetles on cucurbit pests. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Tom. This Zoom will be recorded and will get posted up on YouTube, and I will send out a link as well. So we do ask that everyone keeps their cameras and their microphones off, but you can put any questions that you have in the chat.
All right, great. Well, thanks for the intro, Emily, and hope everybody is doing well and not getting pounded by rain like we've had for the last 3 days in Virginia. It's nice to see the sun again. But in addition to the sun, we're also seeing some of these insects, especially the cucumber beetles, starting to get active on some of our farms. So it is kind of timely to review these pests, and it's kind of like right on the verge of us doing something about it. So go ahead and why is it not advantage? Okay, so this is what I hope to cover. I'm assuming I've got about, or I'd like to, have 45, 50 minutes, and then if folks have some questions, and then yeah, if a question comes up in the chat, someone can um, alert me if I kind of miss that because I would like to address it as on, and I'm not following a script, so I don't mind questions along the way. So please feel free. So I'd like to talk about the My IPM app. Hopefully some of you have heard of that a little bit, and it is relevant to this one because we have cucurbits in that app. And then talk about these two pests that were in the title, cucumber beetle and squash bug, their biology, their management, and a little bit of the research that my grad students and I have been doing. So we will go ahead and roll on. So hopefully most of you are aware of we have commercial recommendation guides relevant to Maryland, and would be this Mid-Atlantic commercial veg rec guide that several of us contribute to. And it is a good source of all kinds of things. And I contribute to the insect part of this, which is writing the recommendations for all these. So that guide is available. I guess the PDFs are free. You probably have to pay depending on your extension service and states and stuff like that. Maybe they're provided at meetings, but this guide is around and it does have the information. Um, but we're also starting to realize that the old guide, this thing that has to get printed and then it has to get updated regularly. Now it's a hard copy of a document, that becomes an issue that, let's use this digital age that we're in where we could have real-time updates, um, things like apps, things everyone's got a phone with them when they're in the field. So how can we mesh these kind of things together? And I think the folks that had the idea of this My IPM app, that's where we're headed, that maybe this is going to be something that you'll have, handheld all this information as well as more because you can have photos and videos and things like that. So there's the QR code for it, but I will go through just pretty quickly. You can go to this website or use that QR code that I had before. Um, but when you do download that app, and it should download pretty quickly, you'll find that it's not all the vegetables in there yet. It's a work in progress. We started by adding cucurbits and tomatoes, and those are the only two currently in the app under vegetables. And when you do there, you can click which which you want. So if you only grow cucurbits, then you wouldn't have to download the tomato content. Just pick cucurbits, diseases, and insects. Um, and then how's this app work? Well, you will have a gallery of photos, which hopefully can help you with diagnosing what it might be. So basically, it'd just be simply trying to match what you see in the field with some of the images, and over time, we hope to just add more and more images to really just make it so that you can almost do self-diagnosis. But with things like diseases, obviously, getting a plant pathologist to really confirm what you have would be still advisable. But this will at least help you as a grower, and IPM consultants do what you do. Um, there will be information in that app. Once you kind of feel like you think you know what you have now, you can learn about it, thresholds and things like that, management recommendations. And then there's even links to the pesticides that are available for that pest, the rates, post-harvest interval information. So all the stuff that's in the recommendations book will be available in this app. And we hope to have all the vegetables someday. We're going to be adding more this coming year, peppers, sweet corn, and brassicas. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. It's out there. It's a free app. But now let's get into the two insects we're going to talk about, cucumber beetles. Well, we have in the mid-Atlantic, East Coast, we have two main species that will attack our cucurbits, the striped and the spotted. And although these are kind of collectively just considered together as the cucumber beetles, they are completely different species. There's some similarities, but there's definitely differences in addition to the way they look. Mostly relevant is that the one to the right, the spotted, is got a much broader host range. You will find that on legumes, feeding on a lot of different things. And its larvae, all the larvae of both species feed on roots, plant roots, but the striped cucumber beetle, they're highly specific to cucurbits, whereas the spotted, its larvae is known as the southern corn rootworm. So obviously they feed on other things other than cucurbit roots, broader host range. So, but there are some similarities, and we will get into it when we start to talk about the biologies. And this kind of goes for both species. They overwinter as an adult. So right now, as we're into the spring, beetles have emerged. I've got a grad student looking at them right now. They've been around for a month now. Um, so they're actually waking up from their winter's nap, and there's probably no cucurbits out there yet. Maybe in some instances things have been planted and have emerged, but for a good portion there was nothing. So these beetles kind of go to anything that's flowering for a while. It's not what they prefer to be on, but there's no cucurbits yet. But they're hungry and they're waiting. And as soon as the first cucurbits show up, all of a sudden, and growers are well aware of this, the beetles come out of nowhere and they come with a vengeance, and they start to pile up. And I'll talk about how and why that is. But one is that they're very hungry, and two, they can communicate really well and call in the masses. And I'll talk about how all that's done. But basically, they're going to go through multiple generations, two to three probably, in our area, and that's from adult to adult. And in the meantime, they will mate, lay their eggs. The larvae will feed on roots for a little bit, pupate, and emerge as a new adult. And that's kind of their life cycle. And the relevance to our agriculture is that along the way, they are wreaking havoc on cucurbits. These beetles chew, they do a lot of chewing. And when a lot of them are out there, they can cause a lot of injury and damage to the plants. Sometimes just early cotyledons and one-leaf plants can just be absolutely destroyed, overcome by these beetles. Um, As the plant gets bigger, it usually can tolerate the defoliation. A lot of research was done showing if it's strictly defoliation, when a plant starts growing and gets vigorous, it usually can outgrow what cucumber beetles could do to it. The other thing we see is that they pile into flowers. Very common sight. That's where you'll mostly find them, actually. So there is a knee-jerk reaction that that's probably very damaging, seeing a bunch of cucumber beetles in the flower. But the research actually shows there could be a minor effect on potentially affecting pollination, but they're also pollinating a little bit. They're not obviously as good as bees, but there is a little bit of pollination effect as they move from flower to flower. So it kind of cancels itself out. And that seeing beetles and flowers isn't the most important thing, and it's probably not even that damaging. Is so it's this early season attack killing the plants, but some other very important things are these beetles can carry some diseases, bacterial wilt being an important one. This bacteria overwinters in the gut of the beetle, and in the spring they introduce it to the cucurbit plants, and this bacteria can go systemic and kill the cucurbit plants when the vines start to run. Very common sight in melons and some of the cucurbit varieties that are cucumber varieties that are very susceptible to the disease. A lot of the pumpkins and squash are not susceptible to that bacteria, but they are susceptible to some viruses like squash mosaic virus, which also can be transmitted by the beetles. The virus can be found in their mouth parts, and they could move it from plant to plant. So if that's not enough, when the beetles go through their generations, and usually your fruit starting appearing 30, 60 days later, these beetles can then feed on your marketable portions, feed right on the rinds and cause direct damage that way. So big time pest can get you in a lot of ways. So what do growers do about it? Conventional growers, so non-organic growers, often decide right off the bat, are we going to go preventative approach or curative? Are we going to wait to see and then do something about it, or are we going to do something to prevent any headaches moving forward? And I would say that most conventional growers choose the preventative approach, and probably wisely for this pest. And here's the reasons why. This beetle can show up right on the cotyledons. The beetle is out before the plants usually emerge, and that means that cotyledons could be threatened, first leaf could be threatened. So trying to control that with a foliar spray, what's going to happen if you spray cotyledons with a pyrethroid? Well, the first leaf is going to be growing very soon, and then the second and third leaves are going to be soon after that. Those leaves are not going to be covered by insecticide and therefore vulnerable. Plus, beetles will continue to colonize the field. So it's very hard to try to do this with foliar spray, not to mention you're probably spraying a lot of bare ground. So going with something systemic seems to make a lot of sense in this situation. And the tool of choice for that has been neonicotinoids since the mid 1990s. These insecticides came in, replaced a lot of the nasty carbamates and organophosphates, and um, because of their low mammalian toxicity, they were widely popular, have been, still are today. Um, and these basically did the job extremely well for cucumber beetles. I've kind of been working on this since these insecticides got registered on the vegetables, and um, definitely this is one pest where this classic chemistry just fit it perfectly. The fact that you could put insecticides on the seed, like far more Fi 400, a little bit of thimethoxam neonic, and that's what you see. You just see a bunch of dead beetles, and that'll happen for about 3 weeks to a month. You can control these beetles with just a seed treatment. So really, really good way to go for cucumber beetles. In addition to seed treatments, we have transplant trenches, chemigation of these neonicotinoids that can go through drip line and stuff, and it all works. It all works great. We've got just tons and tons of data. Kill beetles for up to 45 days and reduce your bacterial wilt and stuff like that. There's no doubt it works. That's not the problem with neonics. The problem is, they're not used by everyone. They're considered big environmental threats, and they're going through a ton of regulatory restrictions that are happening. Everyone's aware of this. So it does affect whether growers are going to use them or not. You may not be allowed to. You may not decide that you want to. So neonics may not be the answer, and I'm not going to get into whether it is or isn't, it's a complicated thing, and there's definitely concerns, and they're just concerns. Um, but now let's look at alternatives. If you don't use a neonicotinoid, don't put something down preventatively. Now you're going to have cucumber beetles very likely, and conventional growers will spray, well, most commonly pyrethroids. Those are all the ones in blue. Those are the cheapest, and they are highly effective. Although I will mention there's some concerns of pyrethroid resistance in Delaware that have popped up from striped cucumber beetle, but for the most part, they work and they work well. Um, so those are what can be done, but using the pyrethroids, which most growers would in that instance, that comes with some problems. And one is that pyrethroids are broad spectrum. They will eliminate most insects that are around, and that would mean a lot of beneficials. And in the case of cucurbits, you've got your pollinators that you want to protect. And then you've got things that are keeping aphids down, keeping the population at bay, and you kill all those predators and parasitoids, and then what happens is aphids explode on you because they are resistant to the pyrethroids and their predators are not. And then you end up getting things like sooty mold growing on or sticky fruit from the honeydew that's raining down, and you've ended up trying to control cucumber beetles, ended up giving you more headaches from aphids is what happens. Seen it many times. So pyrethroids have their issues. Is there anything else then? If neonics are out, pyrethroids are out, there are some other options now. They're going to be a little more expensive. There are diamides that are more broad spectrum, like Carvanta. Uh, it gets it gets these insects, and it gets some other things too, like lepidopteran insects and things like that. The other thing to consider is, if you're on the fence about neonicotinoids, that they're not all the same. They're not all created equal. There are different types of neonicotinoids, and that really affects their non-target. And some that are in the cyanoamidines, these are a type of neonicotinoid like acetamiprid, which is in a sale, are a heck of a lot safer. 100 times less toxic to bees than the other neonicotinoids, actually. So, there's a sale, and then there's also some neonic-like products like Savanto that's come out. Basically does the same thing as neonics, but is way less toxic to bees. So you could pick a very less damaging to pollinators and non-targets. But now the question is, but is that just as good as the other ones? Well, we tested that. Basically, what we did is treated, I think it was melons. We treated them in the field, and then we would pull the leaves at various intervals, and then we also dipped them in different concentrations of a sale where we took the field application rate and then just kept diluting it. So what you see to the left is 1/16,000th of the labeled rate that goes out in the field diluted of a sale. And then you see that they basically have virtually no feeding. We put beetles on them and put them in a petri dish. The control were dipped in water, and you see they just destroyed the leaves. And so, it works, and it actually can be diluted over time, and it's still working extremely well. And that's what the field data are showing. So this is an insecticide. It's actually safer to be. So, there's different options out there, conventional growers. Now, is there anything else? What if you don't want insecticides? What if you're organic? What else can you do? Well, um, some organic growers can do row covers early on, because that's when the plants are most vulnerable. And if you can protect those plants, but that's not for everyone. There's labor involved, and you got to get that off of the plants to allow pollination and also to allow disease not to build up under that row cover. But you can keep cucumber beetles off for a while. But now, is there anything else? Well, how about this um, aggregation behavior that I mentioned early on, that they just seem to show up and show up in mass? What's that all about? Can that be used somehow in management? And well, the research has shown that Beetles respond to semiochemicals. What are those? Those are chemicals that convey signals to them. In this case, it is to aggregate to come to this site. And some are produced by cucurbit plants themselves. They give off cucurbitaceans, these smells, these fragrances, um, and the beetles are attracted to those. Uh, and in fact, they can pick the type of cucurbit plant that they really want, which tends to be some of these winter squashes over others. And there are some commercial products that have come out that have capitalized on this, that have some of these plant-derived compounds, floral volatiles, and beetles are attracted to it. So there are traps that you can use to catch them. I don't know if that's going to be a good control tactic, but just be aware that there are cucumber beetle lures that are out there right now. I'm mentioning this, and I will get back to this in a second. But just this whole idea that beetles are attracted to cucurbit plants has been already capitalized in things like trap cropping, knowing that beetles go crazy over like Cucurbita maxima or some of the winter squashes like Blue Hubbard, Buttercup. They're really attracted to those plants because of their high cucurbitacin levels. That those can actually be used as a trap crop. Plant those, beetles will come to those plants and stay off of your cucumbers or melons or whatever. Um, and that there's research that has shown that that is what happens. Let me get back to that slide. I'm sorry. But I will say that as we've tried this in Virginia, you've got to manage those beetles. You can't just let them come to those plants and think they're never going to leave them. They may eventually kill those plants. There may be spillover. So drawing them to your trap crop and doing something to those beetles would be the best way to go. However you have to do that. If you're an organic grower, it's a little more challenging. You'd have to use something like Pyganic, but it is definitely an option. Um, but what we know now is that there's another compound. So the plants are producing some, but the beetles themselves have a very, very potent pheromone, aggregation pheromone called vitatolactone. And when those male beetles get on plants that they like, they release this, and it is highly potent. And that is the one that is really, really driving them early season. It is this pheromone, not so much the floral compounds. So it's been some great work there. Don Weber at the USDA in Beltsville has done a lot of good work. But one thing I want to point out here, so this is beetles attracted to vitatolactone over time. And this kind of gives you a snapshot of the season. Now, what I want you to cue in on here is in the red box, which is there is a peak of beetle activity in May that happens before, very likely, there are any cucurbits even around yet. Um, so the most beetles you're going to see is before there's even cucurbits. That's your window. You got no competition. Beetles aren't going to go anywhere if you have a very attractive lure during that time. So they got nothing else to go to. So that is where we are starting to feel that we may have something here for a management tactic. So there's my student, Demian Nunez, working on his PhD, and he is working on this. And he has looked at can you enhance vitatolactone with some of these plant compounds and make it even stronger? Kind of have a 1-2 punch. And the answer to that is yes. There is synergistic effects of that beetle pheromone that can be produced in a lure and adding things like indole, which is just a pretty cheap plant pheromone, and it really enhances catch. So that work's been done. So now where we're at with this is can we make an early season trap out, get rid of those beetles during that window, and then they're not around for the rest of the season. So this is basically Demian ran his first trials last year. We couldn't do this large scale on gigantic squash fields, or we did them more on a community garden, small organic garden, small organic farm plots. And what we did is surround the plot with uh, sticky traps that were baited with the pheromone and the caramone indole. And granted, we could have used yellow sticky traps that might have been a little more attractive, but then they might have also caught a lot of non-targets. So we went with clear and just rode totally the lure itself, whether that was going to work. And basically, these were put about 15 meters apart, and we did it before there were any cucurbits out there. So the traps were put out. They caught beetles. Here's 4 sites in Virginia where we ran this. We had 4 trap sites and then 4 control fields where we didn't do the beetle trap out. And yeah, we caught, thousands of beetles on these sticky traps. But the big question is, what did that do to the beetle population coming later? And then here's a snapshot of that. The controls in yellow and the orange is where we did the trap out. And as you can see, it was a significant reduction in cucumber beetle numbers that were going to be there when the crops were out there. So it was a good first season, and we're running it again. It's already started here in Virginia, and we just hope to get you know great data again and continue with this. By the way, we never thought that a clear sticky trap was going to be the best trap out tool. So at the same time, is there a better trap? Is there a better mouse trap, basically? And it may just be a Hubbard squash that is drenched with a neonic and then have the lure kind of draw them. So they're kind of just drawn to these plants using the lure. And then once they feed on the plants, they're going to die. We tried that a little bit, and yeah, just tons of dead beetles piled up on the plastic below. So work in progress, but pretty neat stuff. And yeah, later on we could talk about if anyone has questions there. But let's move on to the next pest, which is squash bugs. And squash bugs are going to come a little bit later. There is the adult there to the left, egg mass on the top, and then the nymphs there on the bottom right. And both squash bug and cucumber beetles they may be overwintering together, who knows, but they are probably around your farm, around your cucurbit plants from last year, and somewhere in the leaf litter they overwinter. Beetles get moving earlier, but then the squash bugs they sleep late. They kind of show up a little bit later and start doing their thing. And here is basically their life cycle. So right now we may have the first squash bugs starting to lumber over, and they're looking for cucurbits, just like cucumber beetles are. And then, probably getting into June, um, you're going to see mating going on. But I will say that it's not, you don't always see the adult squash bug. They're kind of cryptic and they're kind of shy. They hide. They do most of their hiding, come out, lay their eggs and stuff. And there is the egg mass. A lot of us have seen this. Hard to have a cucurbit crop and not see that in the mid-Atlantic. Those are the eggs. Those eggs will hatch. There's the first instars. They kind of look like spiders. They start out with red legs, green, and then as they get a little bit bigger, they start to get gray with black legs. And they like to hang out together. Um, so you see them in masses a lot. And then as they progress, they start to look more and more like an adult as they get their wing pads. And then eventually they've completed their one generation that you'll get per year. So had a student, Sean Boyle. He's Dr. Boyle now. He had worked with Don Weber at the USDA until most recently. And he did his PhD on squash bug and coming up with good pest management. And one of the things he did good work on is like, the seasonal biology of it, and this kind of shows it. You could start to get eggs in June. They're going to probably peak out during the summer in July. Sometimes it's a little bit later. Sometimes it really depends on your crop, when you get your crop out there and things like that. So, but we're looking at a lot of eggs being laid in the summer, but starting probably in June. And once the eggs are laid, then, about 2 weeks later, 10 days, 2 weeks later, you start to get the nymphs starting to go. And those will go into August and then they'll decline come fall at some point. So that's kind of the life cycle. But what we see is that squash bugs just get worse and worse as summer progresses, and eventually there appears to be so many of them. Your cucurbits are starting to go down at the end of the year anyway, probably from some diseases, and squash bugs just finish them off. They create plant wilt when they feed on the leaves. It's called anassa wilt. And then they can feed on fruit and cause some things, and so they're just kind of this later season adding to all your other headaches that are starting to take down your cucurbit crops, and squash bugs definitely contribute to that. So what is done about these insects from the conventional growers? Um, Basically the same insecticides we talked about for cucumber beetles. You've got your pyrethroids and neonicotinoids, and they both work very well on this insect. And but how about some of these other ones? I had mentioned the Savantos and Harvantas, which are the alternative kind of options rather than a pyrethroid to flare natural enemies. And yes, these insecticides work as well on squash bug, as you can see in this trial. Warrior is the pyrethroid standard. But let's get a little bit more into some of the work that we've done, and one was trying to develop a threshold. So can you use egg masses? This was the first question. Can you come up with a threshold on egg masses to justify an insecticide spray? So that was kind of the original question. And this went back to a previous student, James Wilson. And James is now faculty member at Virginia Tech working on honeybees. But James was, this was his question. This was one of his questions on his PhD. And so what we did is counted egg masses. We had different thresholds, so different levels of egg masses on plants. And then it was like, okay, how many nymphs are going to show up and how much damage is going to go on based on that threshold. And we were 2, 3 weeks after doing the sampling, and I said, James, what's the nymph population looking like? And he says, there's none. I'm like, what? We had all these egg masses. Like, well, what happened is virtually all of the eggs did not give rise to squash bugs. They gave rise to a parasitic wasp. It had incredible levels of parasitism. So there were no nymphs. They were all parasitized. And that led us to actually doing some other work, which was, well, geez, we should actually work on the parasitoid, and which James did. We did distributions in Virginia. Seemed to be more of a or higher levels of parasitism in the western kind of higher elevations of Virginia than in the Virginia Beach and the coastal areas of Virginia, which didn't have as much. That was one thing that we picked up on. That's published in a paper. But then we also, and some other work done at the USDA, was that parasitism increases throughout the season. As you get later and later in the summer, you just get more and more parasitism. So, that's where we're at, which is great. We've got this natural biological control agent that's helping to keep squash bug down. But now also we've got our systems where growers are spraying things, and you're wondering about how do you develop a threshold with this parasitoid out there, and that's where we're at. So some of the work was, can you use eggs? Well, it's difficult because just look at parasitism. If you had used eggs in June, yeah, maybe those egg counts could have given rise to how many nymphs you were going to get. But if you did it in July, most of them are parasitized. So having a threshold based on egg counts would not work. And so that was, again, some of Sean's work. Um, Actually, what Sean has come up with is that you can use nymphs, or you should use nymphs as, for the threshold. So you can't just go off of egg masses. But now, how about some of the insecticide spray? And so we do know that, here's percent mortality of some of these insecticides that are out there on squash bug nymphs. And, it's good to see a sale working, given, high percent mortality, because that was a safer insecticide. Um, but now, are these also harmful to the the parasitoid, which was Gryon pennsylvanicum? It's now Hadronotus. And the unfortunate thing is the insecticides that are most effective for squash bug are the most toxic to the parasitoid. So your pyrethroids and things like that. Um, but look at Savanto there. Savanto is a little bit safer on the parasitoid. And these are the adults. And then here is, what about a parasitized egg mass? Is that going to kill the parasitoid if it got sprayed? And the answer is only the pyrethroid does that. These other things like the neonicotinoids and your Savantos, they're pretty safe on the parasitoid if it's in the egg mass. So, it's good IPM information to kind of pull it all together. Um, and that's where we're at right now. I put this paper back up there because I had forgotten to put slides. The other thing that Sean has looked at is if you're a grower or in an area where you don't have a lot of parasitism going on naturally, Sean showed that you could inoculate your field early on with parasitoids. He released parasitized eggs, and that they actually increased parasitism throughout the rest of the summer. So he was able to inoculate fields that had low levels and got them up to high levels. So that's where we're at. That's still in a research. It's not, you can buy this parasitoid yet, but perhaps down the road you will be able to do that. So those are some things we've got going on, and be happy to talk to you all if you have any questions about these two pests.
Great. Thanks so much, Tom. If anyone has any questions, they can feel free to put them in the chat, or if they want to unmute and ask or raise their hand, they can. So, while people do that, I'm gonna throw you on under the bus or in the spot, Tom, and ask you about a pest that you didn't talk about that I always get questions about, which is squash vine borer.
Hmm. Uh, yeah, that's one that can be, the strange thing about squash vine borer, and I don't know why it seems to be, but it is more of a problem in a home garden. And the smaller the farm, that one just seems to, and it doesn't make any sense, because why would a squash vine borer not want this 10-acre pumpkin field? Uh, why is it going to this one person's squash that they have in their garden? So there is that little oddball thing that goes on where it it's a heightened problem for home gardeners, but that also allows you to do some things that you would never be able to do in a 5-acre pumpkin field, which is just check your plants regularly. If you're going out to water them, look for those eggs. It's a red egg laid, a single spherical egg laid on vines towards the base. So catching that egg before it hatches is, you can get rid of it. It'll never be that larvae that bored into the plant. Okay, easier said than done. Who's going to get out there and examine their plants that closely? But I'll just mention it because they really love home gardens. This may be something that you could do something about. So it's a beautiful moth that flies in and drops that egg, and yeah, again, it often goes missed until you start to see something's killing your plant, and you dig around and find this horrible looking cream colored larvae in your vine that just is killing your squash plant at the crown. That's what it is. Now, what can you do about it? Well, little to nothing once they get in the plant. Um, Now, there are diamide insecticides for conventional growers that, if they're using diamides, they're great and they will control this insect. Diamides are, not pretty much not toxic to pollinators. So it is a good fit with cucurbits. So that is a type of, and I will say when I'm mentioning diamides, there were things like coragen that used to be around, but now that diamide has gone generic. And there's all kinds of little things that you'll find now available in smaller quantities that still a little expensive, but it could be something that, does fit smaller farm kind of operations, and that would be one that could be used. There was research that mentioned you could put Bt insecticide and inject it into vines where you have the squash vine borer, and that does work. It does kill it. It's a lot of work, a lot of effort. Um, to me, if you were going to take that level, then you may have taken that same level, and that is search for the eggs and kill and get rid of that before it um, comes in there. And the other thing is putting out a blanket spray of a pyrethroid or something like that to kill any adult moths that start to land on plants. And, it's not a really IPM compatible kind of approach, but you know what? If squash vine borer is just major headaches for you, then a contact insecticide that would kill a moth when it thinks about laying an egg on your cucurbits, that'll work too. Um, so yeah, that's my squash vine borer, and I gotta admit that's one vegetable pest that I haven't had a student or I haven't even published anything on. I've just seen it, and those have been my observations over the years. If anyone else has any stuff that they've learned, I'd love to hear about it.
Well, thanks. I know that wasn't one of the two that or three that we asked you to talk about, but I know it's the one that I get small farmers calling me about repeatedly where they just can't seem to manage to get it. And I don't know if we figured out what that sweet spot is on how much you have to plant in order to not like them. But maybe someday we'll figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an odd, I don't know why they seem to like single
Yeah,
or very few plants. You kind of find those areas.
yeah, yeah. So if anyone has any questions, they can put them in the chat. If not, we can go ahead and end it here and say thank you, Tom, once again for coming and spreading some knowledge about some of these common cucurbit pests. I know cucurbits are something that a lot of people like to grow and like to eat, and a lot of farmers will grow them because how many people like to grow them, or like to eat them, I should say. Um, so yeah, so with that, I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording. And then yeah, since there's no questions, we can go ahead and end it here.